welcome to the latest episode of the Be Better podcast. Thank you to all our listeners, watchers, because you might be on YouTube or you might be on Spotify or some other podcast platform. Who knows? So thank you to those of you who are tuning in. Tell a friend, tell your mum, tell your dad. I don't know, tell someone. We're trying to get more people to tune in. That'd be nice. With me today, I have the amazing Elena Keith from Seven. How's it going?
Good, thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me on board.
Hey, no worries. It's a pleasure. So for people who don't know who Elena Keith is and what you do, who are you?
Well, I'm Elena Keith. I'm based here in Tāmaki Makaurau up in Auckland, and I'm the managing partner for Seven, which is a design agency, which has been going since 1997, so almost 26 years now. Wow. I'm heading into my 50th year, so I feel like I'm kind of halfway through my life and, you know, making some changes that sort of reflect that. I'm the mum of two kids, Spike and Ivy, who are 17 and 19. And I've got to say, having teenagers in this day and age teaches you a lot about and how the next generation see it. And so it's been really interesting. They're far more politically aware than we were at that age. They're far more connected. They're far more values-driven, I would think, in the way that they make their decisions and that sort of thing. They are the walking, talking proof that your values don't mean anything until they cost you something. And so I'm constantly learning from them, which I'm really, really enjoying. So they're heading off to university. Well, one's there already and the other one is heading off there next year. And one of them started off doing global studies, which is a degree at University of Auckland that looks at what it means to be a global citizen and some of the changes and policies and practices that, you know, various governments use to influence change and, you know, and how they're impacted by geopolitical situations, all that kind of stuff. So I'm finding all that really fascinating as a parent because I'm learning a lot through them.
Yeah.
And then in my spare time, I sit on a number of boards, a research faculty at the University of Auckland that looks at hearing loss and vestibular disorders. That's called the Dalmore Centre, which I've been involved with now for probably 7 years. And I sit on the board of the Hearing House, which was set up to help children who are profoundly deaf learn to listen and speak with cochlear implants and with auditory verbal therapy. And now we also have adults as part of the Hearing House as well, of which I am one. I'm profoundly deaf, so it's a cause close to my heart.
Yep. And
I also am on the board of an organisation that is trying to ban helicopters from residential areas. Yes.
Yeah, I remember that conversation now. Yeah, because well, it's like such a. I mean, it's almost like such a first world problem, isn't it? We want to ban helicopters, man. But yeah, I mean, helicopters in residential areas. I know.
I mean, it's a really interesting space because it's not just. It's where there's a number of kind of overlaying frameworks. There's local government, there's, you know, sort of the Auckland Unitary Plan and how that plays into the Environmental Act and all this sort of thing. So it's fascinating. And really what it is it's the pace of change is that government isn't keeping up with the pace of change.
Yep.
And so I just find it absolutely fascinating. We've managed to talk to lots of different politicians and lots of different groups and stakeholders. But what's really become apparent in this is the ecological effect that it has, particularly on things like birds and, you know, wildlife and bits and pieces. And we are trying to regenerate all of that sort of stuff in our city. So it's really important that we preserve that and protect it. And that's a bit, I mean, I've learned, you know, how many dotterels we actually have in the neighbourhood. When you start looking for these things, you find them. So that's what I do in my spare time. And in that, I have a little fox terrier who I love and adore, and she keeps me really busy. Excellent. And I happen to be lucky to be in business with my husband. So the two of us, we run Seven, but we also, live together.
Wow. And on Tuesdays, what do you do then? That's like your Monday covered, working and boards and
I will be honest, I get to the weekend and I'm a little bit like, ooh. And you know, when you get older, I'm not getting any younger, Tim. It's definitely a bit more of a challenge to have that energy. Yeah.
I know the feeling. I just want to finish the helicopter conversation before we move on to more deeper stuff. But the other thing as well, I mean, I spent a little bit of time in the army and I flew in helicopters. They are also inherently massively dangerous, because they're basically that's, you know, for people who don't know much about helicopters, the reason why they have the two rotor blades is because the one on the top, if they didn't have the little one on the back, the helicopter would just basically fling itself apart. They're so unstable. So you'd think, just from a health and safety perspective, having this massively unstable flying object with massive bits of metal that if they fly off, or if it crash lands, it will possibly kill quite a few people. You think that would be top on the list, of regardless of any ecological or noise or but hey.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's fascinating when you think about it. Heliports normally have clearance areas, but the actual clearance area required for a private helipad in a residential street is really small. Like the footprint, you look at it and you just think, this just can't be logical. Having said that, you can't fly in New Zealand unless it's sort of emergency services or police or something, helicopters over neighbourhoods. They have to come in via the sea. So there was a flight vector or sector, if you like, that you can approach. But, you know, it gives them some license to be able to, for safety purposes, if the wind's blowing in a certain direction or something like that, that they can deviate from their flight sector. So it just means that it constantly blows my mind that we can do this. And when I look in other countries and other cities, you know, Sydney, you can't do it. Japan, you can't. LA. What's really interesting about LA is that every building you have a look at, mainly that was built, I think, in the last sort of 40 years, they have flat roofs, and they are designed for have helicopters land on them to be able to rescue people, because they had a high-rise fire one year and they couldn't get a helicopter on the top to rescue people who were trapped in it. So just that one incident changed their entire building code for the city of LA. So there's kind of, when you start looking around the world and what people are doing from an ecological perspective, it just doesn't make sense to have such an intense commercial mode of transport in a residential area.
For one person as well. It was like, if it was a community helicopter, like maybe. If it was, like you say, health, search and rescue, or air ambulance, sure, okay, we're willing to compromise. But hey, I just don't like driving. I don't know, humanity. Hey, we're just it amazes me that some days that we've actually lasted this long without just killing each other, because we are, I mean, we're all idiots to different levels, but some clearly at a greater level. So the name Seven, was that from 1997? Is that
no Gideon, when he set up Seven, before that had a couple of companies with words in them that were numbers. So one was like, called
1, 2. He's like, this was the seventh one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
No, he had Wood 4, and then before that he had V8, and V8 was a really interesting company, and they did some really interesting things. I think they they've done the branding for political parties and all sorts of things, but they really got their roots in rock and roll, where they were doing a lot of music videos and bits and pieces, and a lot of dance parties and that. And so they were the cool kids
nice.
when I first met Gideon. And I think he was turning 30 and wanted to go out on his own. I think they've been approached by a big advertising agency to buy them, and Gid was like, no, I really want to maintain our independence. I want to make sure that if we make a decision, it's one that we want to make, and we're not having to make it for, to fulfill profit that's going to go overseas kind of thing. So he went out on his own and set up Seven, and then over the sort of the last 26 years, we've, it's sort of changed in shape and size. On sort of where we're at. And over that time, we've managed to work with lots of different companies. And I think that's the best thing about running a branding agency, is that you are constantly exposed to other organizations. And it's really interesting. Like you realize that most of them are dysfunctional in their own way, and a lot of them are really good, and a lot of them are trying really hard, and some of them it's just really, it makes me realize about that maturity of running a business, those policies and practices. And sort of B Corp offers a lot of that. I mean, it doesn't solve like your price and your product and your positioning and all that sort of thing, but it's about getting those brilliant basics right. And I think for a lot of companies, if they can get that right, and get that springboard right, then they can go on to do great things. But a lot of them, they come up with a great product, a great idea, and a great service, and they go hell for leather, and then they kind of look backwards and go, oh, hang on, we've got to get our house in order. And I think that's what B Corp for a lot of companies represents, is the ability to be able to get their house in order in a framework that gives them, that structure.
And I guess you sort of mentioned do we work for the big company? I guess within the realm of branding and advertising, there is this tension of the security of, okay, maybe working under a big brand, but also you need that creativity, that outlet. And I guess there's always that tension between what the client kind of wants, what you would like the client to have, where you think you could take it. I mean, because my dad used to be, I used to sort of say he was almost like the Mad Men type of guys. He was in the 60s and 70s, advertising promotion, working for McCann Erickson, big global advertising companies, mainly selling booze and cigarettes, as the 60s and 70s would dictate. It's an interesting world. So yeah, how do you kind of balance that tension between, like, we've got a really cool idea that could, like, particularly with that the rock and roll roots and stuff like that. How do you sort of balance the tension between what you think the client should have versus, well, they're not quite ready for it?
This is a saying that Gideon actually says quite a bit. I'm going to borrow it. That clients always get the work that they deserve. It's kind of that thing where the best kind of client is one that is already quite clear about who they are and where they're going. And
Right.
Sometimes they haven't articulated that particularly well, just purely because they haven't gone through the exercise of doing it. But they're also quite courageous and quite brave. So they're willing to take a risk. They're willing to be open to new ideas. So a lot of the time, what we try and do is establish what is the actual appetite for change. So if a client comes to us and says, we want to solve this, we want to do this, and we'll go, well, do you really? Are you really in a position to be able to make that leap? So we're trying to interpret and trying to digest really where they're at. And sometimes a marketing manager's like, oh, we want to do this. But the board's like, hell no, absolutely not. So we've got to balance that out in terms of how realistic can we be, how pragmatic can we be about what we can actually achieve with a client. But most of the time, clients will go on the journey with you. You've just got to sell the idea and, but it has to be appropriate. It has to be relevant to their aims and their objectives and everything they're doing. So half the time we're working with quite mature organizations that have got, big established marketing functions. And other times it's just a founder and he's got his legal and he's got finance and he's got procurement and all that, but he doesn't have a marketing function, or they put it in with sales and marketing, which are two very different things. And so we sort of become a de facto outsourced marketing department, if you like. We're very much in brand and comms. It's about giving them the tools and the visibility about what they need to do in order to achieve those objectives. So that tension point is probably it's less of a tension point and more having to do the work, having to put the spade in there and actually build that level of understanding and take that client on the journey.
Nice. Because it's a phrase. I was running late to record this podcast because I just had my hair cut, and whenever I go to the barber, there's one of maybe 4 or 5 people that cut your hair, and I jokingly sort of say every time I go, "Oh, just go crazy, like just do something, whatever you want," and they go, "Really?" And I go, "No, same as last time." And I just wonder how many times you get somebody who just goes, "Look, actually, just here's a slab of cash, just go crazy." Like, does that ever happen, or is it generally people like, like maybe change the color and we'll see what that looks like?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's but also it's recognizing that within a lot of brands there's a lot of equity there. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to retain the heritage and the legacy and bring that forward. So it's more of an evolution, a refinement, an extension rather than a whole sort of change. But sometimes a business needs to change. Their competitors have changed, or they've got a cultural issue. So we see brand very much as an internal a solution as well as an external one. How you communicate internally, how you engage your staff is very much a cultural thing, and brand plays a very important role in that. But I think in terms of New Zealanders in marketing tend to be very conservative. They don't have big budgets, compared to when I look at what they spend in Australia or the UK or the US, it's very, very different. So it's about, and also it's changing so much. When I think of the cut through that you have to achieve now, you have to be really smart about the way you go to market with your products and your services. And we bring in specialists who are able to help us do that with, the likes of digital platforms and that sort of thing. We can make them look good and sound good and be relevant, but getting them actually in front of the audiences is a whole other art form.
Why do you think Kiwis are reticent to do marketing? Because I find it, in general, selling, historically selling coaching and training services. So obviously we do B Corp consulting as our core offer, but behind that we've got a bunch of other stuff. So we can do purpose coaching, purpose training, sales training. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I've been doing over the years that we offer. And I've always found that I've spoken to we've had a couple of US clients, and speaking to other people in the US, it's like everyone in the US has got their golf coach, their swimming coach, their therapist, their PT. Like they've got a coach for everything in their life. But in New Zealand, it always feels like if you were going to pitch to a business, or I was going to pitch to a business, and it's kind of like, yeah, you give us some money, we're going to change some colors on your brand palette, we're going to give you a new slogan, blah 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 blah, and that's going to cost you, I don't know, $50,000. Or someone else has come in the same day and they go, I've got a machine that goes bleep. It's going to cost you $100,000, but I can guarantee you that's going to punch out more units per hour. I always feel that they'll take the machine because it's tangible and there's a guaranteed result. And I don't know, what your thoughts are around why, in general, are New Zealanders reticent to invest in? It feels like the intangible. It's just like there's something about that. Whereas, like I say, in other countries, they kind of get it. So what's your take?
Well, I think it really helps recognise at the executive level. So it depends, like I said before, sales and marketing tend to be a dual role, but really sales will always dominate that conversation, because that's obviously what drives income. I think it's definitely because, as you said, it's intangible. Sometimes you can absolutely measure results and return on investment on a brand, absolutely. And the companies that do really well are the ones who invest in their brand. Software as a service is a really good example of this. The top companies, you can always see it. They'll spend, I don't know, 30 cents on the dollar back towards their brand. They recognise the importance of that. I think, though, I've got to say, for Kiwis and New Zealand brands, we do punch above our weight globally. We don't, as a whole, intend to invest that much, but actually when you start comparing our brands with brands overseas, we do incredibly well. One of our team that was with us for, I think, almost 5 years has just recently gone to the UK and travelled around Europe and was messaging us going, oh my God, I was just getting into Europe has made me realise how wonderful New Zealand is at producing great brands across the board. So I think we recognise it, we value it, but I think at the corporate level, we've still got a long way to go.
Because, because on the spot, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know that there have been award-winning ad campaigns that, New Zealand has won global awards for. I guess that some of the road traffic safety stuff, but that's always held up. And generally, I think the ads are pretty powerful. And like the Ghost Chips ad, Monique says you're dumb. But I think that won global awards for its kind of, use of humor to highlight a really, tough subject. But I think because also there was one of the guys who was instrumental in the success of Facebook was a Kiwi, and I think one of the head of design for Apple was a Kiwi for a few years. And you got brands like Allbirds, design, aesthetic, Kiwi founder or co-founder. So I guess punching above a weight, but it's getting it into the day to day, I suppose, is the hard thing. It's kind of I look at someone like Jeremy Moon with Icebreaker. It's just there's a purity, but there's also in some ways, because we are a bit isolated and we are not so much internally focused, but we're not influenced by lots of, particularly in the sort of 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Now it's quite different. You had to go to Sydney, you had to go to Melbourne to go shopping because we had few local brands here, but now all those brands have come here and with online shopping. So I think we've had the freedom to be able to create our own aesthetic, to create our own language, and Kiwis are by nature very, kind of upfront. So a lot of those ad campaigns that you talk about, the ones where particularly around trying to create social change or behavioural change, they drive great engagement, but the really good ones are actually ones that drive impact and change. And that's quite hard to measure sometimes, particularly with road safety and stuff like that. It can be years before you get change. so many variables.
So the best kind of advertising is the ones that, they change attitudes, they change lives, and they change behaviour towards good.
Putting you on the spot, which would be your favourite ad that you feel or campaign that you feel nailed that? Is there one that stands out for you?
Oh, see, I'm a bit of a sook. So I mean, I'll cry about Pampers, baby nappy bed kind of thing. So the ads for me, there was one I saw yesterday for a football club
Right.
in the UK, and it was about mental health, and it
Right.
showed two guys watching a football game over a season.
Mm.
And one of them was sitting on the left looking kind of a little bit down and
Yep.
thing. And the other guy just kept getting up. He was really into the game and all this. And then at the end of it, the guy that was always looking a bit down came in and laid the scarf, the club scarf with all the colours and everything on the empty seat beside him to demonstrate that his friend had obviously taken his life.
Yep.
And it was such a powerful message that sometimes the people who need help are not the most obvious one.
Right.
It can sometimes be the one that having the time of their life sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The other guy, like a miserable old git, was
He's perfectly content. Yeah.
well, you get being a miserable old git, that sort of thing. So those are the things that stay with me. But I think, definitely the entertaining ones are funny. But when I think about New Zealand ads, there was one was Mum always brings home the bacon. Right. And it was for a bacon company, and that was in the 60s and the 70s, or 70s and 80s, I think it was. There are ads here in New Zealand that you talk about that people still remember, but the ghost chips one, definitely. Yeah.
That's
when you think you're dumb.
Yeah. There's a guy I know, John, if he won't be listening. I used to work with him, but he was dating a girl called Monique, and it was just like, there's so much here. Hey John, I just spoke to Monique. She said you're dumb. Ooh, yeah, so much fun. We'll have to put a link to that advert for people listening overseas who've got no idea what we're talking about. So how do you think adverts have changed or marketing changed since? Because you look back at some of the content. I was out for dinner last night with a mate of mine, a group of people, but with one mate in particular, and we were talking about some of the British. He's British as well, and we have a very British sense of humor, and sometimes we feel like our jokes are not well, dare I say it, people don't laugh at the jokes that we find as funny. And we sort of go, it's a British thing. And then we were reminiscing about some of the great adverts from the 80s and 90s that are so memorable because there was a lot of cheeky humor in that sort of particularly 90s, sort of British adverts, where a lot of tongue in cheek. We seem to see less of that at the minute. So how does society influence, is society influencing advertising, or does advertising influence society? And what's your sort of thoughts on, where we're at the minute versus some of those great ads? Is there any ad at the minute that you kind of go, yeah, in 20 years time or 40 years time, we can look back and go, yeah, that was really good?
I think it's probably, when we talk about ads in the 60s and the 70s, society, particularly for England, looked very different then. Not as cosmopolitan as it is now. There's a wonderful Twitter account that I follow that talks about very British humour. And there's
let's go and find that.
Oh, it's brilliant. So it's just got, that sort of awkward thing where you're trying to squeeze past someone and you say, excuse me, and they barely move, and you still say, thank you. Wonderful.
It's classic British.
Yeah, classic British humour. It's a great thing about being a Kiwi is that we grew up with BBC and with CNN. Yep. So we had this mix of both American and
that's sort of synthesis of both of them.
Totally. So we can watch something like the football series that was on Netflix.
The Welcome to Wrexham one.
No.
Sunderland Till I Die.
No, the guy, it's an American one, and he went over to the UK and he started coaching a football team. It'll come to me.
Ted Lasso.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I still haven't seen it yet.
Like, it's utterly brilliant.
It's on the one platform we've got, like Neon, Prime, Disney. We don't have Apple TV, so the only one we don't have is so very frustrating.
So that takes cultural references from both America and the UK, and as a Kiwi and Australians and probably Canadians as well, they all get it. They go, oh yeah, that's funny. Whereas there's some people in America going, why is that funny? For the UK references and vice versa kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's what's so brilliant about that one though is it doesn't just manage to assimilate two cultures and the best of them and the worst of them, but it's also about leadership and teamwork and all that sort of thing. So it's an absolute, I mean, it literally is a teamwork playbook that they run their way through and incorporate into the series. It's just, and the character arcs and everything, it's just brilliant. But I think coming back to advertising, why it's changing because the world is changing. So we did a campaign for an organization that was set up in Singapore, and all of their branding was coming out of Singapore. But to localize that for a New Zealand audience, it is a very different sense of humor, you know, and a lot of Singaporean advertising, there's not a lot of humor. It's very conservative, it's very dry. And for here, you can't get engagement unless you get that cut through where people, it's relatable, it's recognizable, that sort of thing. So I think the challenge for now is if your audience is quite broad, how do you then make it relevant? So I think the challenge is to make sure that your advertising is catering for all of those different audiences. And that's what I think touches on the change from, say, the 60s and the 70s, is your dad was of an era where pretty much blokes across the board were recognizable, if that makes sense. Whereas now they look very different. To be a bloke, what does that mean anymore? You know, it's offensive for some guys to be called a bloke. So it's the world has changed, and therefore advertising had to change with it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Just it's almost like an insight just into how the world is. You know, I studied history at university, so I've got medieval history, and part of the reason I chose it was because I was quite a lazy student. And, you know, medieval history, there was only 6 books written or still surviving from that period of history that you could go and read. Whereas people studying history of the Second World War, well, there's all the media, there's TV, there's radio, there's newspapers, there's diaries, there's personal accounts, there's so many primary sources that you can read through. And you just sort of wonder what it's going to look like in 1,000 years' time, you know, because I was looking at medieval England and France, 1000 to 1200, you know, not many books to go and read. You look forward into the future and just go, you've got everyone's Twitter feed and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and their emails. It's like, but I guess, will advertising be the thing that remains, you know, because there'll be the billboard, you know, that can you imagine an archaeologist uncovering a billboard with some cheesy slogan on it and go, man, what were these people up to in the 2000s and 20s? It's like, man, they were some weird people.
I think, look, it's when I think about how much print we used to produce, you know, coming back to B Corp, if I think we were doing B Corp 20 years ago, you know, after Seven had just been formed, we'd be horrified at the amount of wastage that's created in design advertising. And I think there is more of a conscious effort now to make sure that we're having those conversations with clients about what their advertising looks like, making sure that they're not wastage and inefficiency and that sort of thing. But there's also the wonderful rise of the digital platform, which presents so many opportunities to be able to get in front of people without having to give them a piece of paper or to give them a magazine or to give them something that, you know, obviously consumes quite a lot of resources. But that in itself is sitting in a world where there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of brands can no longer just put something up and people just take it at face value. They are now part of that conversation. So I think the responsibility for companies, that they can no longer just say, oh, we're doing this. They have to prove they're doing it because someone is going to find them out. Someone is going to interrogate their practices and their policies and everything else if they think they're being lied to, or if they think that someone's been dishonest or whatever. So I think that is probably what's driving change in companies more than is that they can no longer hide. If you're going to put yourself out there, then you need to be able to be prepared to be transparent about who you are and what you do.
So that's a great point. So there's greenwashing, which I guess you've kind of just alluded to, but there's a big thing that we keep hearing more and more is this green hushing, where people are scared to talk about the things that they are doing because it's not perfect or it's not good enough, or they've mentioned it once and someone said, oh yes, but you know, you haven't thought about this and that. And for me, my sort of go-to would be, well, look, no one is perfect. And in some situations, there is no great solution. It's option 1 or option 2, both of which are not great, but one might be slightly less worse than the other. So my advice is always lead with it, but be authentic, be transparent, admit where you're not doing as good as you can do, explain why that's the case, and be okay with that. But yeah, how do you talk to brands, or how do you advise people to lead with that authentic transparency, and not worry about, you know, the haters who are always going to hate, because there's some people who are just wired like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're working with a automotive company that produces EVs, and the blowback when we put an ad out into digital space around where people can comment and can provide feedback is there's this other conversation going on around climate change denial, and those people who feel really passionately about change that they feel is being forced upon them, that they're having to buy this, or they're being penalized for this, or that sort of thing. And so for them, they feel it's a values judgment that's being placed upon them, and their behavior is not keeping up to this and that. And the conversation around it is, you kind of look at it and you go, of all the things to get upset about, that kind of seems, I'd be getting upset about healthcare, or inequality, or inequities, and how in anything, or accessibility, all that kind of stuff. But they get really upset about something that I always find that stuff interesting. So I think we say to clients that we work with is that you just have to look forward and keep doing what you're doing. There are some conversations you're never going to win. So you can't solve that discontent around what are the global movement towards, people going into EVs. Eventually, in the next 20 to 30 years, most new car sales will be EVs. So it's just essentially a slow-moving change that's happening that some people are really struggling to sort of get on board with. And so that it's how much oxygen and air you give to those sort of conversations that are happening. And just know that if you're doing things right, then you just have to, look after your own health, so to speak. And this company that we're working with, which is Polestar, a really interesting thing that they've done is they have put out a statement in terms of their efforts for sustainability, and they recognise and stated very early on up front that they're not getting it completely right, but they're on a mission, they're on a pathway to get it right. And I think that's really important, just what you were saying before. And I know when we started on our sustainability journey back in 2019, 4 years ago now, it was this big elephant. How do we start? Where do we start? What does baseline look like? What is our benchmarks that we're going to measure ourselves against, that sort of stuff. So I think for some clients, when they're dipping their toes, they want to be seen to be doing the right thing and everything else. But for most of them, it's this big, overwhelming task that they feel they have to do. They don't see yet the value of embracing it, of assigning resources and people and budget to it. They're still just going, oh, well, if we just say this, and we go, well, it's not enough to say it. If you are challenged on it, you need to be able to back it up. So there's these conversations that we're having. Sometimes they go nowhere. Sometimes they do enact change. Sometimes they'll go, yep, we want to do this. In next year, they're always kind of kicking the can down the road because it's so big. But also we have to recognise we've just gone through a global pandemic, which is still playing out, in the economic climate. And I think for some people, when I talk to them now, particularly some clients, they feel like it's back into BAU. And they can pick up those conversations again. They've now got the headspace for it.
Yep. Yeah, it's I kind of say to people, it's like there's no perfect company, and do what you can with what you've got, and just be doing as much good as you can. There's always going to be haters, and I think for me the easiest way to diffuse them is to sort of go, hey, that's great. We agree. Come in and have a coffee with us and tell us how you think we can solve it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, you don't want to come in. Okay, that's cool. You just want to throw a rock on us. And it's I think I said this to Tish Randall, who from Ragnar Foucault, who was on the last one we just recorded. It's like reading the comments on the newspaper. Just don't read it. Just don't go down that rabbit hole, because there are some people who just spend all day on the internet, throw rocks at people, because that's where they get their fun. And you're never gonna change their opinions. So yeah, for me, it's kind of like, yeah, you're right. We're not perfect. We're working on it. Come and be on an advisory committee for us then. In fact, you can come and lead it and bring 10 people that agree with you and tell us how we do this better. Oh, you haven't got time for that. Okay, well, that's cool. Job on.
Yeah, totally. I think it's indicative of the climate that we're currently in. The pandemic brought about a lot of change, and
I agree.
people adapt to change really well. They just roll with the punches. They go, okay, we're doing this now, and now we're doing this, and they don't think about it. They just kind of get into it, and they still just function. But other people really struggle with change, particularly change that's put upon them, and so it brings out some behavior that is quite surprising at times, and other times you go, yeah, of course it was going to happen, of course they were going to spin out or do this or whatever. But I think what the change that it has brought about is a sort of a suspicion of people, of agendas, of media, of all this kind of thing, and trying to, how much oxygen do you give it? How much you just kind of go, I said to my kids the other day, we were talking about when we were younger, we didn't know whether a friend had a party on a Friday night and we weren't invited until we got on Monday morning. You just didn't know, because there was no cell phones, there was no anything like that. So you didn't have this immediacy of information that means you have to constantly think about it. You could go, oh, I'm reading this book now, I'm watching this movie, I'm hanging out with this group of people. Always got this background noise going on that demands your attention, and how much space you give to that is really going to dictate how focused you are on anything you get done, and how much mental health you have. So it's really hard to, I just kind of, the way I look at it is just, I've only got so many hours in the day, and these are the things I want to achieve, and if I want to do that, then there's just going to be a lot of stuff I've got to let go. And half of that is also looking at something like Twitter, which I love because I get so much good information, but I also get so much bad information as well. So it's constantly trying to fact check, understand all that sort of thing.
When we are, sort of semi-advanced chimpanzee-based meat sacks spinning on a floating orb in the middle of a universe that is continually expanding in infinite numbers of universes, and then we've got all the crap and bullshit that we carry in our heads, and we're not actually equipped to really deal with most of this stuff, if any of this stuff, and then we throw AI into the mix, and now you just don't know what's what and which way's up. And so like I say, I think we're doing surprisingly well considering a lot of the factors working against us to be better humans. So do you find, do you have any, again, the sort of attention piece, do you have any, because you are adding to this content milieu, this mix of stuff that's being thrown out at us chimpanzee-based humans. Do you feel any tension that you're part of that noise, or do you feel that you're doing it as a force for good in general? So you're kind of, at the top end of that, and actually there's other people that maybe shouldn't be providing so much noise, or is that something that comes into your mind?
Yeah, I think we went back in 2019 when we started looking at our sustainability strategy. We were asking those kind of questions. What is our role? We were having really, I think, little to no conversations with clients about the messages that they might put out in the market, that sort of thing. I mean, you have a code of ethics that you adhere to, absolutely. And if you're working with a client that you're a little bit suspect about what it is they're trying to achieve, then you shouldn't be working with them. But brand and marketing, depending on where it is, can be considered to be dirty words that are seen as culprits, not saviors, when it comes to being good in the environment and helping people and that sort of thing. So if we're promoting something like a gambling platform, we just wouldn't do that, because I just feel that it's and there are people who can gamble responsibly and they don't have an issue with it. But I think as marketers and as branders, we can make sure that we don't support practices like that promote gambling or self-harm or that sort of thing. Having said that, we're using mediums to promote messages like TikTok and bits and pieces that can sometimes do real harm, because it promotes disordered eating, in a subject matter or something like that. So it's really hard to, I think in an ideal world, Tim, we go and live on a deserted island and grow our vegetables and sit around a fire every night playing music and but the reality of the world that we're in and look, there's a lot of bad that's coming out of it, but there's also a lot of good that's coming out of it. And as I said before, around that transparency, I think that's what businesses in particular that we're talking to, they're becoming a lot more, we can't hide behind the boardroom practices anymore. Our team are demanding, 20 years ago, you would never demand of your board what their HR policy, to get them to shape their HR policy. Absolutely not. So definitely what we're seeing is a change in employee behaviour that is demanding and expecting better behaviour from their execs.
And I guess it's like any tool, isn't it? It can be used as a force for evil or a force for good. And I think with all of this, doing good, sustainability, environmental, it's not black and white. There's grey, there's nuance. It's not always obvious that one answer is better than the other. And I think, for me, it keeps coming back to, like, just do the best with what you've got in front of you that you think, do the research, think about it, and go from there. But I think half the battle is having, and clearly you've been down a rabbit hole of thinking about it. Whereas I think there's still a lot of people who haven't even thought about it, and they're just, we'll just take the money. It's not us to decide whether this company's ethical or moral. They just want a new brand and they want some slick advertising campaign. So sure, we'll go do it. So it's complicated.
I think it's kind of that thing where I think if you want to, you can tell a lot of a company around the metrics that they have, and it may be metrics that they publish or not, but things like staff turnover, and there are different industries where there's a higher rate of staff turnover. But things like that, where you can actually tell a lot about a company from the outside looking at them and whether or not you want to spend your dollars with them. And I think that the next generation coming through are definitely more conscious about the brands that they engage with. And I mean, when we were kids, you kind of had 2 or 3 companies that might, give you milk, or give you bread, or whatever. We really have a lot of consumer choice. Whereas now you go into a supermarket and it's not just 7 cereal brands, there's 30 or 40 kind of thing. So you have a lot of choice, and with that choice comes the need to create shortcuts around your thinking. And so we had the Healthy Heart Tick campaign for the Heart Foundation and stuff like that. So those shortcuts that are being applied, New Zealand made, or it's what do you call it? Sustainable, all that sort of thing. I think we're going to see more and more and more companies embracing the idea of having a shortcut associated with their product or their service or their offering, because that's the only way they're going to stand out or stand within a collective of their competitors and to be chosen by the consumer.
100% agree, which is why I think we're seeing B Corp pop up as one of those. Good number of the companies that we work with are consumer facing brands, because they see the power of being able to prove everything that we just talked about. We are a brand that does care. We're doing this as much good as we can, and here's the independent proof to validate that. We're not just making I think the whole sales and marketing, I spent most of my early career in sales. In some companies, the sales and marketing teams were actually scheduled to have lunch at different times so that there was no fighting between the 2 departments. The salespeople, we always used to say, "Oh, what are the boys and girls doing with their crayons today?" Have they painted some pretty pictures? Meanwhile, the marketing's kind of like, speaker. Oh, there we go. We're back on. How many lunches and coffees have you had today? Have you actually sold anything? Or you just
we had a client. We were involved with their product team. They want to take a product to market, and marketing had brought us into the conversation with the product team. And we said to them, "Okay, have we spoken to sales? Is sales part of this conversation?" "No, why would they be?" And I said, "Well, product is not on the ground with clients. Sales is, and they know what the objections are. They know what people want, how much they're prepared to pay. They know what their competitors are selling. Sales need to be part of this conversation." So I think there was an opportunity for that not to happen. I think, yeah, definitely marketing still seen as hard liquor and best guesses and the colouring in department and, you know, all that sort of good thing. And sales is still seen as boozy lunches and, you know, kickbacks and all that sort of stuff. But I think their product design is becoming more of a thing, you know, whereas before they were sort of, it's almost like not so much given prominence, but they're given the respect and the space that they deserve and that they need in order to flourish. And again, mature companies that do that do really well.
Yeah, no, 100%. So young Elena, did she always think she was going to get into marketing, branding, advertising? Like what was your path into the industry?
No, I was born into a family of, there were 3 kids. So I had 2 older brothers and we spent some time on a farm, and I actually always thought I was going to be a farmer's wife, to be honest. Right. You know, driving tractors and doing all that sort of thing. Loved it, absolutely loved being on the farm. But when we came back into Auckland, and my hearing at that point was kind of getting worse and worse and worse. So Mum had German measles when she was pregnant with me, which is rubella. And back in those days, I did not want to wear hearing aids. So I was constantly feeding them to the dog, putting them down the couch, flushing them down the toilet. And my mum's insurance company, my parents' insurance company, was like, we're not insuring these anymore. Like,
it's reasonable.
Yeah, totally. So I just totally scuppered my future by, you know, not being able to hear. And so I sort of bumbled my way through school. And when I got to sixth form, which is year 12, I dropped out. And my mum was horrified. She spent all this money on my education and, you know, big dreams and aspiration. So to be honest, at 17, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just bumbled around, did retail, went overseas, went to the UK when I was 18 for 18 months, had a ball, came back, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I had no skills apart from, you know, pub work and bits and pieces. So I just sort of fell into a number of roles over the years. And as my hearing got worse, I had to get a cochlear implant. And it was at that point that I probably started working more with charities and not for profits, because I was in very much an advocacy role. And that was really rewarding. And it was kind of one of those things where when you are the consumer voice, it's never just your own story. You have to learn and understand other people's journeys, because everyone's journeys, they're all going in the same direction and all going to the same place, but they get there in their own way. And it's understanding that and understanding the barriers and the limitations that they have in bits and pieces. So I kind of definitely drawing on my parents. Both of them were part of Lions, which was a global movement, which is very much grassroots fundraising organization, very much just sort of a, what would you call it, a fraternity network sort of thing, a brotherhood, if you like. So they were Lions and Lionesses, and they were always volunteering, and they were always having meetings at our place where they would come and they would, you know, make all these frozen pizzas and run magic shows and everything for kids and bits and pieces. So I'd always had been exposed to that and always knew that I would have a volunteering role. But I think it wasn't until I had kids that I really started to appreciate that people had different opportunities and needed more help, kind of thing. So I sort of fell into it through the advocacy work for hearing loss and through the Hearing House. And so when I got to Seven, which was 4 years ago, before that I was working for an IT company and I was traveling a lot. I was in and out of Australia every couple of weeks. It's pretty burnt out, actually. I was pretty tired, a lot of sleepless nights. And as Gideon, my husband, said, well, why don't you come work for me? You've had a huge amount of management training through your previous role, and I could, you know, focus more on doing what I do best and get you to run the company. So I joined Seven back in 2019, I think it was, 2008. And it's been fairly new for me for brand. So I don't have the same knowledge that my team do. And we're lucky we've got a really stable team that have been with us for a long time. So, and they're all specialists in their own right. And I've come out of various roles that has brought sort of that experience with them. So my job at Seven really is to make the most of that talent and that experience and those skills and build that team together to do the best work they can. So I'm more in a facilitation role in that respect. You know, they're amazing. They do what they do. And I just try and remove all the barriers, set them up for success and make sure that Seven's doing the best that it can by them. But it's interesting. We are a small team, so there's only so far you can kind of go with us. So what we've recognized early on was that we don't have our team forever, but while they're with us, we want them to have had the best experience they can, that they leave us better equipped than when they came in. I've got more experience, I've got more knowledge, I've got more skills. So we take things like development plans really seriously. And we did from pretty much when I arrived. It's like, here's where you currently are, here's where you want to be, what do we need to do to get you there, kind of thing. We did a monthly one-on-ones. We do all that good stuff that doesn't typically exist in small organizations, and particularly not in design and advertising. I find when I interview someone who's come out of, say, an advertising agency and stuff like that, so many of our agencies are overseas owned. They're not independent. Yep. And so there's a real pursuit of profit over people. So they're working stupid hours. Yep. It's not a great setup. The business model is not sustainable in terms of how they treat their people. And I can see a real shift happening in the industry where people are recognizing they can't keep doing what they've always done. So I think that's where, and I don't think we're different from a lot of other smaller agencies who are trying to do the right thing by their people, but that was a big focus for me when I came in, was to making sure that if our people were okay, then our client would be okay. If we didn't burn them out, we didn't make them really tired, they'd be creative, they would have, really good ideas, and they produce really good work. And they would stay with us for, as long as it suited them. I think when you've got a great team that's been with you for a long time, you are so efficient in the way that you work, and you know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and there's a lot of growth and that sort of stuff. So it makes you a lot more nimble and agile.
Nice. I think that's a cultural thing all over the show. Like you even hear it, I spent 10 years selling medical devices, and you even hear now that the younger surgical communities, particularly the surgeons, the old school surgeons were, I'm working hard, you will work as hard as me. And the whole training regime for surgeons for residency, I heard about this. I think it's Matthew Walker, who's got a book on sleep.
Yeah.
And the only reason why junior doctors are worked so hard is because the guy who invented the junior doctor kind of scheme program in the US was basically a cocaine addict who didn't sleep. And so the whole idea, so it's like, the whole culture has stemmed from this one guy in like the early, I think it must have been like the 1930s or 40s or something. So the whole idea of you just work hard to be in this industry is based on one guy. And I think, I noticed it as I was leaving the industry, but you definitely hear about it. Like the younger surgeons coming through, actually, I don't want to work in private 6 days a week, just to earn more money. I actually want to be at home and see my kids. And I think in general, I look at most of the people, in my peer group, split roles where mum and dad are trying to do a drop off and a pick up at school. More people trying to get to assembly or the cultural events. My daughter had an event at school a couple of months ago. It was kind of they had to do a project actually on environmental issues, and they had an open block for 2 hours from like 2 to 4. Parents come along. I was actually astounded how many parents turned up. It's like it felt like half the kids had their parents there. And so I think increasingly people are realizing that. I had a good mate of mine pass away this year, and that's why I've smashed my skiing this year. It's like Ben was 45 and he died. I'm 45. And I was skiing yesterday with a couple of mates, and it's just like, the skiing wasn't great. It's the last day of the season, but I'm going to remember the chats and the laughs we had on the lift today. I'm probably not going to remember that spreadsheet that I did, the day before. And I think more and more people are realizing, and I think COVID is all part of this. People have kind of had this collective sort of almost near-death experience, or, hey, look, actually something could come and wipe us out or wipe you out quite easily. And I think we've had a bit of a, kick up the bum, which is why we're seeing a rise of people wanting to do more with their life, which is then leading to the whole sustainability and actually what are we doing at work? It's one thing to want to make sure my kids are doing well and we're thriving, but actually I'm going to spend 80,000 hours in this office or a selection of offices over my lifetime. What am I doing there? So interesting times.
Well, and that was definitely a cause for us to kind of look at the B Corp models, because our team are looking for meaningful work. They're looking for, if they're going to spend 40 hours somewhere each week, you want them to be feeling, I mean, you can't fulfill them in every aspect of their working role, but you can definitely contribute a lot to it by, I think, showing up as a responsible employer, or just by leading by example. We've tried to be as transparent as we can with the team around what we do and how we do it and our planning. We've always involved them in our strategic planning and that kind of stuff, because they learn by being exposed to that kind of stuff, rather than going, oh, well, you're just a designer and that's all you really need to know. It's kind of like, this is how the business is run, this is what we do, this is, the results of our surveys with our clients, all that kind of thing. So the more we can involve them in that, the better they become as well, in terms of being more well-rounded. I mean, they may go on to run their own studios one day and all that kind of stuff. So you want to equip them for that next stage.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, the need for meaning and purpose in life. I think it's way more fundamental than we've been told or led to believe. At any level, and I think it for me, it underlines the mental health crisis. I don't think I'm not an expert on mental health, but I think it's more than just, I didn't go for a walk today, my mate didn't call me. I think there's a deeper yearning for meaning and purpose. For me, it's a fundamental human desire, and I think that's what most people are missing, which then the second order effects of, well, I haven't spoken to a mate for a while, I haven't been for a walk, I haven't gone in the outdoors, I'm not looking after myself physically, I'm not sleeping, all of that other stuff, I think is less important than the core. I mean, there's a survey, it was a YouGov survey British government did, and I think it was 2018, around about 30% of the British population surveyed said that their job provided them with no meaning and was more than likely contributing to destroying the planet. And then we wonder why there's a mental health crisis. It's like, yeah, but I'm paying the mortgage, so I'm winning. It's like, no, there's a bit more to it than that. So
I mean, you're paying off the mortgage, but you're also paying off the shareholder wealth for the banks through interest rates. And I mean, we had a conversation recently with a guy who came out from the UK to work here in New Zealand. He was working in hospitality, and actually no, he was from Minnesota, I think it was, and he had a degree in, it was environmental engineering. It was something quite significant. He'd done it for 4 or 5 years. He put a lot of time into it, and got to the end of it and went, "What's the point?" So he's here having I guess a midlife crisis or a quarter life crisis. He's 26, and he's just sort of going, "Do I want to spend my life hustling? Do I want to spend my time working for people, creating shareholder wealth where it's not really going to anyone but to their own back pocket?" So I think those kind of conversations have been had. And look, I've got to be frank, sometimes it's just, it's a conversation that some of us can have, and some of us just don't have the luxury of having. They're working 3 jobs, so it's a last thing on their mind. They are just trying to get through every day. So it's a luxury to be able to have those kind of conversations. And if you have that luxury to have those conversations, then you're having it on behalf of people who can't. And that's a really important thing.
And James Stewart from Gemelli, who, again, a recent podcast episode that should be coming out before this one, so you can go back and listen to it if you didn't listen to it. He had that big realization as well. He sort of said how he went over to Sydney as a sort of young 20-ish something age-year-old, and was sort of told by someone, hey, you do realize that you're probably in the top 1% of people in terms of status and revenue, full stop, on the globe. And he was like, okay, I hadn't really thought about that. And that's what's sort of really driving him. So in his business, he gives 100% of his profits away to 2 charities, because he's like, I've got enough. And I think that's a really key thing. And I've heard this on a few other podcasts from that other people have recently, where they say, instead of being almost like disgusted at your privilege or what you've got, like, with what you've got, do the most good. And it kind of closes that loop. And that's why a real sense of purpose and contribution is the ultimate selfish act, because you feel good, you feel fulfilled by using what you've got to create good, and there's a beneficiary of that, or multiple beneficiaries of it. So yeah, it's the lottery, the cosmic lottery of where you were born, who your parents are, all the rest of it. It's like, and this is the thing, so the word, I think it was Aristotle. It was Aristotle or Socrates, one of the two. They said, the purpose, so what's the meaning of life is basically to use your genius to fulfill a human need. So what is the thing? But what's interesting is the word genius, the root of that word in Latin actually means your spirit, rather than you being a smart person. Because when you say the word genius, most people think of Einstein. So the key to life is to go, you have been born with a key set of skills and attributes, at birth, which are then molded and influenced over time. So using that best skill that you have to solve a human need or an environmental or planetary need, that's what we're aiming for. And it gets lost in the bullshit of, I've got to pay the mortgage, and I need a bigger car, and I want to do this and I want to do that. And
yeah, I think for me, my heroes are the people who are going through a whole bunch of shit, but they're still giving. There's a guy I follow on Twitter who's I think in Thailand, looking after something like 40, 50 dogs, and he's rehoming them, and they're all strays, and he just gets on his motorbike every day and just feeds them. He's got a route that he runs, and he feeds these dogs, and but he's really struggling with his mental health. He's got severe depression. He's really open about it, and I'm looking at him going, he's got fulfillment and purpose in feeding these dogs and rehoming them and making sure that they're spayed and neutered and they've got all their shots and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that's his therapy. Maybe that's his sense of self that he's found.
100%. Yeah.
But he could just crawl under the duvet for another, a day and just, I can't face it or whatever. So I think it's those people who get back on the horse and just keep going. That I just find, admirable.
It was this is a really interesting guy, Sebastian Junger. He's a journalist, anthropologist, writer, and he followed a bunch of US troops in Afghanistan to try and work out what is it about this close-knit community with a sense of purpose, whether not saying I agree with everything that happened in Afghanistan, but they have a clearly defined united group, sense of purpose, comradeship, what have you. And then why do those guys get PTSD? And one of the things he realized was that close-knit group support, like literally I will die for you. But one of the big things he talked about in the research of, I think his book's called Tribe, in terms of mental health, he said during the Second World War, the British government were really, really worried that when the Germans started bombing London and the southeast of England, they were really scared that the population would then sort of capitulate and then put pressure on the government to stop the war, to stop the bombing. But what they found was mental health actually increased, because what happens is the sense of needing, I needed to help other people, actually stop people from kind of going insane or feeling that depression, because it's like, I feel grateful that my house wasn't bombed tonight, and I now have a sense of duty that I need to go and try and save the neighbors who are trapped in the rubble. And so people were volunteering to be ambulance drivers and firemen and women. And I think that's a really key thing, is however, if you're feeling bad, it's not kind of necessarily look to go and find someone who's worse off so that you can kind of feel a sense of sort of schadenfreude, but there's always someone who is worse off than you. And if you can spend your time helping them, you're already in a much better place. It's increasingly well documented that even just if someone's having a tough time, get them a pet to look after, or not even a pet, hey, why don't you go and help out the birds in the park? Why don't you just go and feed them and recognize that you can be of service to something or someone, and then sort of build on that. Really interesting research.
I think the mobilization of civilians in England during the war effort, and I think of all those women who went out to, manufacture munitions and all sorts of stuff. It was just crazy. It was such a radical change in society at that time. And then the ongoing effects of that. But it gave a lot of women who were probably really smart, who were stuck in these sort of homemaker roles, an opportunity to vise up and stand up and do stuff that they were really interested in and learn new skills and do all that kind of stuff. It was, and I think I think sometimes the greatest changes in society is where it's forced upon us. I look at universities for years, I was saying, you have to take your learning online, you have to digitize it, you have to get with the 21st century. And then COVID force them to do that.
Yep.
And we'll see another shift as a result of how their consumers and their audiences start to change the way that they learn and engage with those institutions. So kind of exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always, everything's always changing, isn't it? It's just how quickly and how you keep up with it. And so how did and so working in the business with your partner and home life, is that, because I worked with my dad for about 18 months and it was going to be a murder suicide, and so I'm like, I'm out, can't do this. And I feel it's like I say, it's I think that is black and white. I think you can either work with family or you can't. I don't see that there's no healthy middle ground where sometimes it's okay. But I mean, you're four odd years in, so clearly you're working it out.
To be honest, it's kind of it's gone much better than I thought it would, and I didn't really have any expectations going into it.
Is he just doing what he's just doing what he's told?
Well, I think it's kind of, we've both got very different roles. Gideon's been doing this, he's 7 years, 8 years older than me, so he'd been in this sector, or been in this this category, if you like, for a very long time. And so my role was very much around the business side of it, which he already had under control, but it freed him up to be able to be far more strategic and far more client facing and all that sort of stuff, and focus more on the team, because I could never develop them in a design sense or anything like that. So because we've got quite defined roles and areas that we look after, so mine's all, the finance side of it, bits and pieces, and new business, then it's quite easy because you stay in your lane, so to speak. But I think if we were two creatives, it might be there might be some more conflict. I don't know. I think the hardest thing is that running a business during a pandemic, when we went into lockdown, I literally went into fetal position under the desk. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. I was already, we had a board of directors at the time. I was preparing all of our board papers we were having emergency meetings, and I was thinking, this is going to be a black swan event. This is going to be catastrophic. My biggest fear is that we were going to lose our team. And so I was trying to make sure that we were holding on to everyone. So the government hadn't brought in, the wage.
Any support.
So we just said to everyone, we'd already done a lot of working from home, we'd done one day, we'd sent everyone home and just said, look, just a bit of preparation in case this happened. So we were lucky, we could hit the ground running from day one, but a lot of our clients had to move servers, they had to do all this stuff. So for the first week, they were just scrambling. But together as a couple during that time, it was really good because we could be super efficient. We lived in the same house, we could communicate really easily. But it also meant that we were both in it together. So if I'd still been in my previous IT role, I would have been upstairs working in a different office and focused on that. And Gideon would have been trying to keep the business afloat in his own way. So we could be supportive, but we're also like, holy shit, we've got all our eggs in one basket. So that was challenging, not in the sense, I think we had our first fight in like years, like our big first real fight about 3 or 4 days in. That was probably going to happen anyway, because attention has to go somewhere. I can't remember what it was over. It was something really stupid. I think a client was jumping up and down saying they needed something, and I was like, we've got to move now, we can't lose anyone. I was in panic mode, whereas Gideon's sort of like, slow down, chill, we've got this, it's okay. And so I think for our team, God knows what they thought when we first came in. Oh my God, it's going to be a husband and wife team. They're going to fight. We're going to So they know more about our family than they should do, because we have conversations about this and that. But I think what it does mean is that, I get to see the best of Gideon every day, which is awesome. He's really good at what he does, and he's just fantastic. So in that respect, it's great. I get to experience that. But I also get to experience the bit where I kind of go, oh, we need to move more quickly on this, we need to do that. So you need to pick your battles, and you need to, like anyone you work with, you just got to.
It sounds like, I think, I think you've also got that yin and yang. You've got the, and I think that's what you need. I think if you were both creatives, possibly would be a disaster, unless you're 100% aligned, but then there's almost less value in you both being aligned on something, because there isn't that tension. And I think good relationships, whether it's husband and wife or whatever, or business partnerships, having that tension where you're being pulled. It's almost like like a magnet that's kind of pulling but pushing at the same time to sort of squeeze the best out of both parties, and just
Yeah.
being adult and grown up about it. To go, no, I see what you're saying. I respect it. I politely disagree, but I'm happy to compromise. Yeah, picky battles.
Yeah.
Yeah, super
And
cool.
it was actually Gideon that was, he was the one who brought B Corp in for us in
Okay.
2019. He said, oh, look, there's a guy in Australia who's done it or was doing it. And he said, it looks like a really good framework. But I don't think he would have done it on his own. I think
Right.
he needed someone like myself to come in and pull it together. But it was definitely a team effort. I mean, I had, we were a very small team, but we had 3 or 4 of us working on it at any one time, developing policies and bits and pieces.
Yep.
Because it was a massive undertaking for a small organisation to do.
Yep.
And so he was always a champion in terms of making sure that we were, getting it right and doing
Yep.
it right and keep doing it right. So he's been great in that respect. He's been a massive champion of B Corp in the organisation.
Nice. And so was that was a project that you took over, or was it sort of handed to you, or a bit of both?
Well, so Bex, our account director, is studying part-time in the sustainability sector. I can't remember quite what she's doing, and she's absolutely loving it. So in 2019, she came to us, she said, look, I want to pull together our sustainability strategy. And she was looking at things like mapping our impact against people and planet and profit, and how we'd incorporate, the ESG goals into our decision-making, and how we could adopt those to become a good corporate citizen. And so she took us through a workshop, she came up with a strategy, and we recognised that we were in unprecedented times and that the climate was changing, society was changing, and we needed to future-proof, and we didn't want to be left behind. So we were doing things like signing up to Toitu and, offsetting our carbon and buying carbon credits and doing all that sort of thing. But we realised that we needed something a lot more. And so B Corp, when we looked at it in 2020, we were like, yeah, we need to do this. And of course, the pandemic hit. And then and I think for part of our strategic planning, when I look back at our strategic plan for 2021, we had B Corp in there as a goal. And we were going to get it by September 2021. We were going to get our certification. Well, we didn't get it for another 2 years. And I think the lesson that we learned was we should have got you in at the beginning and not at the end. I think that would have made a massive difference. We would have got there a lot sooner, because it was just this big elephant that we were trying to bite off one little bite at a time. And there was lots of stabbing around in the dark. Well, there was for me anyway. I think the team had quite a bit of clarity, but I found it really overwhelming. And it brought a lot of pressure and it brought a lot of expectation. And so we just kind of picked it up and put it down depending on how busy we were. And I think if I could give any advice, it's just you just have to build the time in and the resources and the money. You've got to assign a budget to it. It does, it costs money to do this. And you really need to put aside time to get your head around the amount of information there is. I mean, you were talking about the changes in the standards that have been proposed. I mean, there's something like 90 pages of information to work through just in the draft changes, and that you can't just skim read that. You've really got to read it and go, well, what are the implications for our organisation when this comes on stream in 2024? So you just sort of, you really need to want to do this. You don't do it for marketing purposes. You certainly don't do it for kudos. You do it for the team, you do it for the organisation, and you do it for the confidence knowing that you're getting it right. Well, you hope you're getting it right. So it's big, but it's worth it.
Nice. Great. Great summary of the journey. And it was a pleasure to help you out, because you were doing a bunch of really cool stuff. That I don't think it's always interesting when you reflect, because we see so many companies doing so much good stuff. Quite often you're all fish in water where you just think, well, that's just how we do it. And but that's actually really special, because I've not seen anyone else do that. And we've worked with hundreds of companies to do B Corp. And so, it's always cool to see companies have that moment of, oh, actually we're actually doing pretty good. Because I think people who want to do good, we typically are humble. And also we always think we're not doing as much good as we could be doing. And so so kudos to you guys for genuinely having, and I think that's the key. I think I don't think we've got actually, no, we may have got like 1 or 2 clients who I'm kind of like, I don't think you're really 100% into the impact and doing good thing here. I think this is possibly marketing driven. But hey, you're going to be a B Corp, and that's going to force you to think differently and change some practices. So I'm okay with that. But yeah, I would much prefer that they're all in, like people like yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's it's just you guys are doing some really good stuff, and yeah, fully you're like a textbook case. Yeah, totally aligned behind it. Want to do it, build a team around it, just go get it done.
Yeah.
Tick. Happy days.
Yeah, and I think for us, I mean, I don't really have any great lessons I can impart, just purely because as a professional services organisation, it's not like we had a lot of wastage that we had to minimise that. And a lot of the stuff that you do doesn't feel like it's creating meaningful impact. You know, reducing your rubbish by 80% when you're only producing. I mean, we literally could go 3 weeks and never have to empty our rubbish bin because we just don't generate that much waste out of the team. So these little things like that, but I think it's more being able to formalize policies around development of your team and how you engage with clients and how you support your community and stuff like that. But I think what I'm particularly interested in is one of the new draft amendments to the standards is looking at a thing called collective action. And so that's looking at taking joint action with other stakeholders to, you know, advance positive collective social and environmental impacts and stuff like that. That really interests me because I still feel like we're acting in silos. We've reached out to other B Corps and we're engaging them in various projects and bits and pieces and as suppliers, but I think being able to even engage more in our community or our stakeholders that aren't B Corp, but kind of by engaging them, they're absorbing some of the stuff that we're doing. We're leading by example and we're learning from them and vice versa. That really excites me. And I think it's more interesting for our team. When you're a small team, you become really siloed in your thinking. So when you bring other organizations into the mix, then you have the opportunity to kind of, you know, grow and learn and be exposed to different ideas and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, that's super cool. No, you're doing some pretty good stuff. And so, what does being a B Corp mean to you now that you've got it?
Oh, I think for us it's confidence that we're getting it right, or mostly right. I think it's building trust with our team and our clients. Most of our clients have never heard of it. They just kind of go, "Oh, that's cool. What's that?" So there's a bit of a, you know, kind of an awareness raising and education that goes on there. I think there's a real satisfaction that we got there in the end. You know, it was a 3-year journey, which was quite full on. It was humbling when we did our first verification process and we didn't make it. I think we got marked down 3 or 4 points, which dropped us down. So that was just like, what? But we're getting so much right kind of thing. So that was really, that was really humbling and actually quite a good exercise to go through. It's recognizing as a B Corp that we don't stand still, that there's always opportunities for improvement. I recently had a team member join us and took them through cultural competency training, and in the midst of it just realized how inadequate and poor it really was, because it was the first time we'd taken someone through it. And so I just kind of brought it to a halt, and I just went, actually, we really need to make sure that this is it's up to a much better standard. So you're a lot more conscious of what good looks like, rather than just ticking a box going, oh, okay, well, we've got some videos and we've done da. You know, you actually really need to do it right. So yeah, definitely cultural competency is an area that I'd like to improve more on. It definitely influences our decision making, the kind of suppliers that we use, how we hire, how we approach everything that we do is done through a B Corp lens. We'll have conversations and we'll go, actually, how does that look from a B Corp perspective? There are still organizations that we work with, you know, our supply chain has companies from all over the world because of software and stuff like that. And where you're sort of sitting there in the background going, oh, okay, so if we work with that agency and if we work with this and this and this, we work with this client, what does that mean? Is there values alignment? So we're far more conscious in our decision making.
Nice. And I think that's, like I said, I think there's been a theme through the whole thing. It's just like, just be aware, be conscious of the, you know, like I say, sometimes there's no great decision, but just be conscious about the fact there's no great options and be aware of that. But I think, for service-based businesses like yours or mine, the environmental impact. I mean, for you, there's possibly some bigger ones in terms of like, advising the client, well, actually, do we need to do billboards? What is the waste impact of that? But I think where you did score some good points as well, for you, it's client selection, because you were doing, I think when we were working together, you were doing a lot of work with was it a local South Auckland based medical company that was about providing, real grassroots medical services to disadvantaged communities. Well, you could be working to create a really cool advertising campaign for a vaping company, but I don't think you are. So I think that for service companies is actually typically, when you look at like a materiality assessment of where do we create impact for us and stakeholders, for you, it's 90% of it is the work that you're doing on the day to day. And I think you're clearly advanced in your thinking on that, and you've got some great clients, and you're working to use your skills as a force for good for all the other organizations that are a force for good, which is similar to, I guess, what we do. We're just trying to help companies become a B Corp, and then beyond that, help them do whatever else they want to do once they've done that. So whereas again, we could be consulting to vaping companies on, I don't know, how to sell more vapes, whatever.
And I guess that's the kind of a challenge in that is getting it right. I mean, sometimes from a pragmatic point of view, the challenge in balancing that purpose versus profit is you still have to get paid at the end of the day to be able to pay your staff well, to be able to pay your suppliers, do all that kind of thing. So, if you across your clients and went, well, what state are they in? No, as you said before, no one's got it perfect. I mean, we're in a good place with our clients, but there's always kind of things where you think you like I said before, you're far more conscious, you're far more aware, you no longer take things at face value, you are interrogating it, you are having those conversations. It's like, could you really say that? Should we be saying that? That kind of thing. How can we reframe that in a different way that you're not greenwashing or, making claims that you can't back up kind of thing. But in New Zealand, we're pretty good. We are pretty good. Our corruption rates are really low, that sort of stuff. So I think most of us are getting it right. And certainly our clients, we're always, checking to make sure we're getting it right.
Yeah. And again, I think it just reflects the whole conversation. It's not it's not black and white. It's not linear. It's squiggly. But the general trend is, and that's the thing, you can't fill from an empty cup. And you need to have some money. You need to have money coming in for you to do more good, for you to hire people, to be able to provide those internal programs that helps them become a better human. And so like I say, as long as the general trend is in the right direction, you're all good. There's one question actually I wanted to ask you earlier on. So with your hearing challenges, how has that influenced your career and your working life, do you feel? And for you now as a leader, is that, I mean, I guess it's, you don't know, because you don't know what a life without having hearing aids or an implant would look like. But do you feel that that's influenced and made you, I guess, you're obviously, you're a B Corp, you're doing as much good as you can. Do you feel that influenced you? Because you mentioned you had a pretty good, with your parents being lions and lionesses. So that kind of idea of doing good, there was obviously some seeds there, but do you think the hearing challenge did that accelerate your compassion for other people, or do you think you would have got there?
Oh, no, definitely. Because the thing is that you don't realize how ableist the world is until, you can't navigate it like everybody else. But also too, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, you either sank or swam. There was no, I remember at school, I was the only deaf kid in a school of 1,500 girls, and, it was pretty full on. So I had a speech and drama teacher, but there was no counselling, there was no support around the isolation that comes with hearing loss or anything like that. So you do kind of see yourself as a bit of a defective human being. You go, oh, well, I'm not like everyone else. And all the stuff that comes with that means you are far more empathetic when people are, they're not born with advantages. They're fighting that much harder to kind of, get to the front of the pack or even just keep up with the pack. So definitely I'm a lot more empathetic. I'm a lot more compassionate, but also so aware of my own privilege, where when you start working in these charities and you start getting around, I think one of the biggest sort of moments for me was when I was working with a hearing house, when I was working for them, not just on the board of directors. And we were having to post letters out to some families to create appointments to let them know that, you know, little Johnny needed to come in and have a auditory verbal therapy session, because they didn't have emails. They didn't have mobile numbers.
Right.
They never answered the phone because they were always at work. You know, they had 5 kids working 2 shifts, and, you know, they didn't have transport. So these kids were falling through the cracks. They weren't getting to their sessions, and they were falling further and further behind. So then, well, how do we get to them? Do we get a bus? Do we go to them? Do we take the teacher? How do we group these kids rather than getting them to come to us? How do we create services that are far more accessible? So you're constantly exposed to inequities in healthcare and in services and stuff like that. So you're always trying to problem solve. And I think for me, when I first got into working with charities and bits and pieces, it was, where are the gaps? And you would see these gaps emerge all the time. And one of the first gaps I ever saw was teenagers with hearing loss. They were in these mainstream schools, and some of them were in, you know, deaf education facilities, but most of them were just trying to swim on their own. So we set up a support group for these kids, and we got them together, and about once a month we would meet, and I would take these 12 to 15 teenagers out, and we'd go kayaking, we'd go rock climbing, and we'd go go-karting, and we'd do all these different things. And what I realized was, one day we were out on these bunch of kayaks out on the water, and all of them had taken their hearing aids out and their cochlear implants and put them on shore, because if they've got wet, they're screwed. And we were using hand signals to communicate, and some can sign, some can't. I can't sign. I tried to learn, but I've forgotten it all. And I suddenly realized, when we were all together, that no one was the odd one out, that there was real comfort in the normalization of having a bunch of people together who were experiencing the same thing. They weren't the only kid out there kayaking going, what's going on? You know, so there was this real power in connection and community. And I think that's where I've always, both in business and in my volunteering work, is to try and build those connections, try and always make people feel like they belong, that they have a sense of connection with people around them and that sort of stuff, whether it's with their boss or their friends or their colleagues or whatever. So yeah, it definitely has shaped me. It definitely has made me sort of more aware of people's discomfort or limitations or opportunities and that kind of stuff. And conversely, it's also made me, you know, you've always got that imposter syndrome. You're always going, oh, well, I probably shouldn't be here. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I'm going to be found out. I should, you know, that kind of stuff. Part of that's not having an education, you know, that finished at age 16 kind of thing. But yeah, I think most people in this day and age, you are now exposed to so many people who aren't like other people. What is normal anymore?
That's what is normal is one of my favorite expressions. It's that what's it, Con Air with Nicolas Cage, you know, where he's, if you've seen that movie, he's on the back of the plane and there's the car dangling out the back, and he's on any other day that would seem strange. It's like, well, what is normal? And I think I just, the reason I was curious to ask that question is the over my years of being employed, I had 2 bosses who were the best bosses. Both of them were dyslexic, and they both grew up with struggles and challenges as kids, and I think they have that sense of empathy, and I want everyone to be doing okay. It was overwhelming, just the sense of, I want everyone to thrive. I want everyone to have an opportunity in this business. And I think it's just, and having helped set up a charity here in Christchurch, it wasn't my idea, but I was engaged to help get it off the ground, called the Harpai Access Card, which is all about trying to provide more accessibility for people with a disability. So it's got 9 recognized barriers that people with a disability might experience in the, I guess, you know, the outside world. And then it trains the typically either an events venue or a retailer or a shop or a cafe or restaurant. It trains their staff on, hey, these are the 9 barriers in your store. Be aware that these barriers exist, and how do you mitigate them or remove them? So that when the person with a disability turns up and they present the card, the retail staff know, oh, okay, you're not just being lazy and saying I need to go and sit down. It's like, actually, I have trouble standing or queuing for more than a few seconds. So I'm going to sit down and you're going to come and serve me, which I know you don't normally do. And so, just breaking down those barriers, because one thing we always, when we were talking initially to retail outlets, they said, look, we just don't know how to deal with people with a disability. So we either ignore them or, we kind of keep our eyes down and don't engage and talk about the disability. So I think that's like a whole other podcast we could probably do on that stuff. But yeah, I just think that there is this, the leaders with empathy, leaders who've had some kind of battle or struggle. There's something special there, and in terms of the imposter syndrome, none of us know what we're doing. You know, it's like no adult actually. That I think that is the big mystery behind the veil, is all those people who you thought knew what they were doing when you were a kid, all those teachers, all those parents, all those adults. None of us know what we're doing. We are all winging it. So don't buy into the imposter syndrome, because no one knows what we're doing. We're all just giving it a go, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I agree with that. And I always say to my team, look, you're not alone in it. Everybody's got it, and people that you wouldn't suspect. But I think coming back to how to engage with people with disabilities, the best at it are toddlers. If you watch young children in a way that they engage with someone with a disability before they've got the uncomfortableness of social practices, they're amazing. I remember my children, they wanted me to understand them, because trust me, if the person that could give you a chocolate cookie didn't understand you, you made it your business to make you. So they would grab my face and they would pull it around and say, look at me, mummy, I'm talking to you. And they would make sure that I could read their lips, like, me a cookie.
Whatever it takes to get a cookie. I'm getting a cookie.
And I thought no one would ever grab my face. They might kind of, of course they wouldn't, but I just, children amaze me constantly when you remove all of those kind of
like preconceptions and just rules, social rules.
I'll find a solution.
No, kids are good for that. They're very grounding in that. It's like, that's a really good point. Why didn't I think of that? Oh, very cool. So looking into the future then, what do you think the future looks like for B Corp in general?
Here in New Zealand, I hope more do it. I think one of the issues that I had with B Corp was that it's very American centric. It's very and I mean, of the obvious things, we've got ACC here in New Zealand, so the public we've got a socialized healthcare system and stuff like that. So but I think it's more sort of relating it back to Indigenous rights and recognition of that here in New Zealand. So it's almost like if they could incorporate a module that is particular for New Zealand. How do you incorporate Te Tiriti or the treaty into your everyday workplace practices, or recognising within B Corp that exists, and perhaps getting extra, recognition for that would be great. Or saying, look, you need to, even if it's in Australia, it's recognition of their Indigenous rights as well. And I think that would be really good, as to having that sort of that localization, if you like, of the framework. There are some charities that I've worked with that their whole purpose was to go out of business. They no longer wanted to exist because no one ever needed them.
Nice.
And what would be great is for B Corp, no one needs it because everybody's been a good corporate citizen.
Just becomes normal.
Totally. And I think with the changes that are coming or that are proposed for the draft standards, recognizing that there are different sizes. So, I mean, we are totally over-engineered because of B Corp. I think our employee handbook's now 126 pages long or something. Yeah, for for a really small professional services team. You could slot that into any large organization and it would be just as robust and just as appropriate. So I think it's recognizing that for small organizations, it's such a big undertaking that to make it more accessible, to make it more, and also I would love to see something for startups where it's the brilliant basics to get them up and running, because often they come up with a good product, a good idea, and then looking back, oh shit, actually, like I said before, they need to get their house in order. So I think, I just hope more and more people embrace it as a framework, and that it gets more global recognition. I definitely know for us, in our we're on a number of government panels, and they were seeking what they call broader outcomes here in New Zealand. That look like 5% of your suppliers, you should be targeting Māori-based organisations, that kind of stuff. Where it just becomes almost a requirement. Definitely as a director, there was a requirement around risk, but at the moment we're not penalised for, say, for example, if we have a privacy breach and your information that I hold is out there in the public domain, there is no penalty for me.
Yeah.
I make it known with the Privacy Commissioner, I have to deal with it, I have to do all those sort of things, I have to notify you. But ultimately, there is no penalty. In Australia, it's quite different. So they take things like cybersecurity really seriously.
Yeah.
So I think as a director of a company, wearing that hat, there needs to be far more rigorous compliance that needs to happen at a corporate level. And then for B Corp, that sits nicely with that. And I think then you've got a really good, robust, mature corporate framework that you can operate within.
Yeah, it's tough. The localization, globalization conversation. Yeah, it's I totally get it. It's one of the more common bits of feedback is this is very Americanized. I think it's when you look at, we're just at what 7,200-ish B Corps globally. It's still 0.01% of the total possible limited liability companies. Didn't include sole traders on that, so it's probably even a lower percent than that. It's relatively early days, but give them the feedback. I know a few companies have said you need to connect in with other principles of doing business, Te Ao Māori principles or other, and I think there's a world of wisdom and knowledge there that we're so disconnected from that there is quite a lot of alignment between Te Ao Māori principles and B Corp in terms of long-term thinking, regenerative principles, community, people first, etc. So it's a tough one. Way above my pay grade in terms of that one. But I know that they're working, see what they can do. And the governance one, I think that's a really interesting one. I think having quite a few conversations at the minute about governance within the B Corp world. In fact, again, Tish from Raglan Food Co., they're in a really interesting position because they've got, I think the chairman of their board, or one of their board members, was the CEO of Synlait, and he led Synlait through their B Corp journey. So she has got a board member who has done B Corp with a really big company. And I think there's one other board member, she said, who really kind of gets the B Corp thing. But the vast majority of companies that we're helping who are at that medium size where they maybe have a board, a lot of the board members are kind of like, B Corp, not really sure. And with the new requirement to update your constitution or corporate governing documents, one thing I'm looking at working with Sandra Smedhall's the lead conspirator on this. I think I've mentioned her now in the last couple of podcast episodes. That there is no great. There's a few courses for governance around sort of climate risk, but what about being a good employer? What about being a good community citizen? What about transparency, ethics? Some of that should be baseline governance. But then you look at some of the big companies, the Mainzil one for Kiwis, which is like one of the big ones. There was another governance based thing in the paper recently I heard about or read about, which I can't remember, but I have a real, I don't know what's the word, lack of, I don't know, I just don't think governance is done well anyway. And then we now add on this new requirement for thinking more holistically, and I don't think it's a tick box like this is the risk. I think for me it comes back to the Gus Speth quote, the guy who's an environmental lawyer who, again paraphrasing badly, he said, look, I used to think 10 years of great science and information and data would convince people that we need to change how we run the show, but I've realized it's a metaphysical, spiritual consciousness awareness change that we need, and I think that's the piece that boards and owners and other company executives need to go on that journey of. Actually, there is more than just making money. It's how we do what we do, and it's the impact that we have. And I think it's a really interesting time to be in business, which companies like yours are navigating, and we're trying to help people navigate. And we'll look back hopefully in 50 years' time and go, "Wow, that was a crazy ride." Why did it take so long for people to realize that? But
for sure,
fun times.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, what's new and exciting in the world of Seven? Obviously, you've nailed your B Corp. Any other exciting projects or clients coming up in the near future?
Well, we mentioned Polestar back at the beginning, the EV. Yep, we've just bought one. And I'm really excited about owning an EV. We're picking it up next week. And it's definitely a new way of living and a new way of driving. And I'm sure we'll look back in 20 years' time and go, God, why did it take so long? But I'm quite excited about it. I'm excited about what it means from an integration point of view, being able to drive into the driveway and open the garage door through the car and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That side of the technology really interests me. Being able to have it's so funny. My mum's just bought a new car recently. And she's like, oh my God, it's got reverse camera and it's got this. And it tells me if someone's too close. And she's just completely buzzing out on what are quite standard features now. Obviously, the other car for quite a while. And I think it's funny, we've kind of been driving these cars for so long and are so much part of the fabric of who we are as a society that to make that change, I'm kind of looking forward to the conversations with friends who are climate deniers and, climate change deniers and all that sort of thing. It's just, again, it's been part of that conversation. It's pushing it forward. It's been part of the solution, which And if you'd asked me 10 years ago that I would drive an electric car, I would have said, hell no.
And I guess Gideon's previous company, be called V8, would maybe provide some closures to your.
Yeah, totally.
Nice. Oh, super cool. You are a cool bunch of humans doing some really cool stuff. So thanks for having us be a small part of your journey. But yeah, thanks more for all the cool work that you're doing, and no doubt you're going to go on and do even more cool stuff for even more cool brands. So yeah, if anyone's needing their branding or advertising redone, 0800 7.
Thank you, Tim. And look, I've just if I could say any, on a final note, get someone like Tim in early. Don't try and go it alone. Honestly, it is get a consultant in, get Tim in, and because it's a massive undertaking. And when you build it into your strategy and your planning and your workflows and your decision making, when it's just part of your BAU and it's in it, then you can't imagine not having it. You're kind of like, but to get started, it's big. It's not a walk in the park. So get help and get it early and get someone who knows.
Rigorous but achievable is how I like to describe it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you so much for your time, and apologies for being late. Hopefully my hair does look quite good. I just had it cut beforehand. Who knows? But yeah, you keep on doing the amazing stuff you're doing, and hopefully we'll see you in Auckland before the end of the year, hopefully.
Right. Thanks, Tim.
So yeah. Hey, it's Tim here, that B Corp bloke from Grow Good. If you want more content on purpose, B Corp, how to do more good in the world as an individual or a business, then you know the drill. Hit the like and subscribe. Check out some of our other videos. They're probably floating around here somewhere. You know how it works. Thank you so much. See you next time.